power and flexibility of derived fields and component settings. Then we'll discuss some best practices for maintaining CJA, and we'll wrap up by looking at avoiding some common pitfalls. I'll pause for questions or comments after each section. And public speaking doesn't come naturally to me, so please have grace if I lose my place or stutter or anything like that. And I was telling Sarah and Gretchen and Luke before we started that I plan for everything. I got a PDF of the slides. I got a PDF of the project in case Workspace goes down. But my power went out about an hour ago, and thank goodness it's come back on now. So hopefully it'll stay on and we won't have any issues during it.
It's doing awesome, and nothing like shaking your nerves by losing power. That's just like no fair.
That's right. I'm like, I didn't plan for one tiny little screen and no lights or anything like that, but I've got a big screen now. So let's begin by looking at the underlying architecture of Adobe Experience Platform and CJA and how they interact. So on the left side here, we've got a variety of ingestion methods for data. So we can stream in data, we can batch data, we can have files, we can have connectors, things like that. And then in the middle there, in the red, we see AEP's data preparation, enhancement, storage, and governance. And on the right side, we see AEP tools such as real-time CDP, Journey Optimizer, Customer Journey Analytics, and exporting to other custom tools. So one of the great things about the platform is that all of the reporting tools can leverage the same data. In some cases, of course, you want that data to be different, but it is nice that when you want something to match, they use the same data. And it's nice when the API matches what Workspace says too. So here we've got CJA itself. So on the left side, we've got the data set that actually resides within AEP. And the data set is essentially a table. Then in the middle, we've got the purple connection image. And that's where multiple data sets are joined and unioned together. And then on the right, we see multiple data views that are based upon that single connection. And then finally on the right, we see a Workspace project. The good news is that Workspace in CJA is almost identical to Workspace in Adobe Analytics. So if you're comfortable with an Adobe Analytics, then you'll feel at ease within CJA with Workspace as well.
I think one thing on that, Josh, if you want to go back, I'll chat with you a little bit on that previous screen. On the connections, I'm kind of in a love-hate relationship right now with connections. Like, I love that what you do is it allows you to pick your data sets, from AEP and say, okay, because you'll have lots of data sets in AEP, but you don't want all that stuff, all of them in CJA. You want specific data sets. Yeah. So from that point of view, I love it because connections is like you pick, and then in CJA, they'll be there for you. What can sometimes where my hate part comes in is within connections, I can't narrow it down. So I can say I want this data set from an AEP, but you get all that data that's in that data set. You can't filter it. So connection. So that's my love hate. I love that it's just give me these data sets. I kind of hate that I can't filter the data set a little bit more before I pull it into CJA, but I don't know. I don't know if that will change in the future. I can understand why they do it, but
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because if you only want certain rows from a data set, then it would be nice to be able to filter that out.
Like what we're having to do right now is, make a different data set in AEP that has the rows that Gretchen and I don't want removed. So then what we end up pulling in is just what we want. So there's definitely ways around it, but it's just wanted to share.
Yeah, that's a good point. And along that same line, so connections is where the cost of CJA comes in, because the number of rows that you have in the connection is your data budget. And, that's where the retention happens. But the way the retention happens is for every row in the data set, every row in the connection, you keep it for a certain length of time. And I've made a recommendation to Adobe that it would be nice, let's say after 2 years, if you could do some sort of aggregation so you can keep those aggregated rows. So you've got orders and revenue and, maybe break them out by a couple metrics, but you don't have billions of rows that you obviously are paying for over time. So, yeah. Any other questions or comments or suggestions or anything on CJA or AEP architecture?
Yeah. Recommendations to Adobe on their architecture.
Yeah,
Too funny. Our wish list.
that's right. All right. If not, then next we'll look at unlocking insights that bring values to the brand. So a hypothetical business question that we'll use here. So we have 3 specific category pages that are a prime focus. Are these visitors who engage with these pages converting at a higher rate than our other visitors? And so for this question, the new Journey Canvas visualization tool is a powerful tool that allows us to create very granular journeys. We'll use this tool in the sandbox to examine our business question. With this tool, we can break out and get detailed data for various groups. We can create filters from our findings. And if we have real-time CDP, we can activate audiences directly from the canvas. Let's take a look, and I'll switch to the sandbox. So here in the sandbox, I built out just a basic journey canvas. And so here you can see we've got just 3 metrics. So we've got product views. We see the number of people in the sandbox data set that meet that, along with the number of sessions. We see that of those 1,700 people, 13% or 228 start a checkout. We have a 50% fallout, and 114 people ended up placing an order. So just a basic journey canvas that we have. But the really cool thing is that you can add a lot of details to narrow down your journey. So what I'm going to do is just come over here, and I'm going to find a couple of page names. And so we're going to filter our journey canvas for only those who flowed through one of these 3 page names. So we're going to drop the lifestyle page on here. We'll drop the collections page, and we'll drop the office page. So since we're going to just zoom out a little bit, I'm going to put these over here. And creating this journey canvas is as easily as dropping any node or metric, or you can do a metric on a node. So if we wanted to look at only product views of certain products, we could do that. And then you just draw a line between your nodes. That can be the trickiest part sometimes, because you got to get the connection in kind of just the right spot. But now that we've got that, you'll see that our data here is updated. So now we're only looking at visitors who flowed through one of these 3 particular category pages. And so those that looked at these category pages, we had 782 people that had product views, or 39% of the previous node. And then 140 people started checkout. And the conversion from the checkout to orders was 51%. So we can see a total of 72 people placed an order. And so if you want to, you can break out on the canvas. It's a little finicky about exactly where you click. You got to right click like right on this label. But so if we want to break down, we can break down on the journey canvas, and let's break it out by product name. So that'll pull up a box here that'll show us some of our top product names that were on those particular orders. And then a really powerful feature is if you click the open in freeform table, or I could have chosen to break out in a freeform table, then it'll pull up a freeform table by product name, and it's got the filter. It creates the filter that is the journey that I defined, and then it's got a people metric on there. But I can do a little bit of manipulation here. And I can add whatever metrics I want to on here. And I can look at and compare by product name, the people, the sessions, the card additions, the revenue, things like that. And it built all of that filter for me, so there was nothing that I had to do there. And if you want to break it out by a different dimension, you just drop it on there. And so it's really cool that it creates that table for you and does a lot of that heavy lifting for some of those segments that would be pretty difficult to kind of replicate that. So I'm going to remove this breakout now just for the sake of clarity. But one thing that is also pretty cool with this is that we can, I'm going to delete, oops, that deleted too many nodes. I'm going to delete just these 3 nodes at the beginning here. And you'll notice my numbers will then recalculate. It's pretty quick if you've got a lot of data in there. Of course, it can take a little bit longer, but we can show top nodes before this node. So let's say that we want to see the top page names that were interacted before someone had a product view. Then we can do that, and it's going to drop those top 3 nodes on the canvas itself. And of course,
yeah, when it's wait now, I'll throw it to Gretchen here really fast because
yeah.
Gretchen, I know you've been using this canvas, seeing you do some reports here at KeyBank with this. What are your thoughts and experience?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm trying some new stuff here on my Journey canvas.
Yeah, and it's really cool. I think a lot of this is, especially for ad hoc analysis, it's really easy to build things out, and you can compare journeys or, look at what happens whenever you make changes. But then you can create filters of, certain steps, or if you wanted to activate an audience, you got real-time CDP, just click right here and you create an audience from that, and then you can activate that audience based on whatever filters you define. You can add little notes on here as well on the lines, and then of course you can trend any steps. So if you want to see, when any of the particular, you got to click in just the right spot. But yeah, of course now I can't get it to right click, but yeah, you can trend it. Exactly. You can trend it just like you can, a lot of the flow visualizations.
Nice.
Yeah. Gretchen, how have you been telling? Because I know I can't remember exactly how you worded, but you've been helping people here. So use the flow, like this canvas versus the flow versus the fallout. So maybe Josh can talk about how you kind of guided people on where to start, which one to use, when to use which of the 3. They're all really cool.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the top thing about the Journey canvas is that you can add like some places like in where we know we have a lot of fallout, we can add the reason for the fallout. Like, hey, these people go to like a stop page, so it's not just this big, long bar, skinny bar in your fallout. It's like, okay, now it makes more sense where these people are going to. And then also it's been great, for us in our application process where we have different paths for new customers and existing customers. They eventually come together, but we had to build separate funnels for new and existing. But in the canvas, we can show them kind of together because we can have multiple entry points in the canvas where you can't really. You kind of do that in the funnel, but the multiple, the entry points don't align perfectly. So that's been nice.
Yeah, so then I guess you could see the fallout for the new customers, what steps they fall out before they merge together.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. That's nice. Cool. Any other questions on Journey Canvas before we move on to another use case? All right. So I'll switch back over here real quick, and then so another hypothetical business question. We've been testing a new experience focused on one of our products, this beautiful Adobe mug that we have here. So what do the results of our test show? And so within CJA, they've now made the experimentation panel available to all organizations. You don't have to leverage their testing tool to necessarily use that. The only thing that needs to happen is an administrator does need to do a little bit of brief setup that's pretty easy to do. But once you do that, then anyone can create an experimentation panel. And so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to add a new experimentation panel. And I've got one below just in case this one doesn't work. But here all we have to do is pick the experiment ID. And in this case, since it's sandbox data, it's just one experiment ID that we have. So I'll pick this one. And then once we do that, then it's going to load the different variants that we have for that experiment. So the only thing I have to do now is to select the control variant. So in this example, I'm going to say variant 1 is the control. And now here we can select one or more success metrics. And you can actually create a calculated metric, which I'm going to do for this. So we're going to do just orders of this beautiful mug. And so I'm going to find the product name here. Now this experimentation panel, I actually read Brian All, I think is his name, published a blog post on this experimentation panel and a lot of the statistical concepts and things that are behind it. And I've got the link that I've got later in the deck that we can share out. But he indicated that not all calculated metrics are actually able to be used with the experimentation panel, but at least some basic ones are. But I think you can't use some of the more advanced functions. But we only want to look at orders of the mug itself. And then we choose our normalizing metric of either people, sessions, or events. I'm going to just leave it at people. And then we click build. It takes a minute or two here to build this, but analysts don't have to create any filters or segments in Adobe Analytics terms. And I know that when I've worked with people, often that filters can be, if you don't get a filter exactly right, then you might be including people that you didn't want to include or miscalculating some numbers, things like that. And then by default, it actually adds in a filter to remove anyone who was exposed to multiple variants. So in this case, if we add anyone that's exposed to variant 1 and variant 2, then they will be removed from the data. But pretty quickly here, you see that we've got a report that shows us the lift was 7.6%. And since it's just random dummy data, the confidence level is only 11.2%. But if our confidence level was at least 95%, then it would tell us if our experiment was a winner or a loser. And then here we see the variant line. We had 56 mug orders, whereas the control only had 52. And our conversion rates are pretty similar. Our lift 7.6. Of course, the control doesn't have a lift since it's the default experience. And then we've got a trending table here that shows us the conversion rates over time for both of those.
Yeah. I love how it gives you conclusive or inconclusive. So makes it easy for people to know how much, not get too excited too early.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there's not a sample size or power calculation. I see the question in the chat. There's not one that's actually built into the experimentation panel. You can add other tables and other calculations. So that might be one that you can build out. And I just found Brian's blog post actually this morning, so I didn't get a chance to finish reading through it. But I don't know if he might mention some of those things in there as well.
Yeah. Adobe does have their own, it's just kind of like a web-based sample size calculator. So I just put the link to that in there. So that's what, I've been using for that for years. So
thing here, I have to share that.
Hey, Sarah, we're kind of losing your audio there.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me better now?
Yes.
Awesome. So with this experimentation panel, like Josh was talking about, it can do any platform. It's not to target anymore like it kind of used to be with Adobe Analytics. Yeah. And so when Josh was talking about the setup is actually within CJA too. So you don't need to go to developer or do like an integration. It's how you set up setting up the dimension. Yeah, Josh, awesome. You go into it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
I'll let you talk to it because it's much slicker. And when you say integration, it's really right here. So anybody with the power to come in and create the dimension will be able to.
Yeah, so all you have to do is they added what they call context labels. And so you just define one of them as the experimentation experiment, and then you define the other one as experimentation variable or variant. And so, and even if you've got, I think a lot of people probably collect both of those in the same string, then you can split those out. You just parse the experiment ID and the variant into two separate ones, and keep them over here and define that. So yeah, once you've defined those, then it unlocks that experimentation. There's nothing else that has to be in Adobe as far as, setting up your experiment or doing anything like that. Yep. Any other questions on that panel? Well, next we'll look at some derived field and component settings. So derived fields are an extremely powerful tool within CJA that allow us to solve a wide variety of use cases. They apply retroactively to all data within CJA, which is wonderful. Not like a processing rule. I see Sarah's name on processing rules still to this day. And if something changed in the system and we didn't update the processing rule in time, it's broken until we update the processing rule. But with CJA, that's a thing of the past. However, if you want to set a specific start date, you can do that. You've got that flexibility within CJA. So I've listed out a few examples of the use cases here, and we'll take a closer look at just a couple of the business cases to see how we can use derived fields and answer some questions. So another hypothetical business question is, how are sessions engaging with and flowing through the site? So here we see a typical flow diagram, and I don't know about you guys, but many of the flow diagrams that I try to work with seem like they are a little cumbersome because we've got so many different pages and so many different flows that it's really hard to see much of a pattern. And so instead of looking at all of the pages, I decided to create a page category derived field. And so I'm going to use multiple conditions and fields to create a new value. It applies retroactively immediately to all data. And so this is something you can do in Adobe Analytics with classifications, and classifications are probably the only thing in Adobe Analytics that's retroactive. But these all do also offer the ability to use several different fields within the same logic that you create, which isn't something that you can do. So I'm going to pull up the derived field, and we'll take a look at how I created the categories. So first what I did was I made our page name lowercase so that any differences in casing doesn't impact anything. That's something we'll talk about here in a minute. But with our lowercase page name, then I did a case when condition. And this is similar to a SQL case when, but you don't have to remember the right syntax or anything. You just choose from the dropdown. So here I said if our page name equals the slash, which represents the home page, or if it contains the phrase default, then we're going to assign it to the home page. Notice over here too that we've got a preview that shows us how many of the hits would have met each rule. And so then if our page name includes checkout or payment or order complete, shipping address, pick address, then we put it in the checkout category. Login and sign-ins go to login, category pages, so on and so forth. And so over here, I've got a table, and this table shows now that I've got 9 different categories, and I've got, instead of page views by each individual page, I've got them now broken out by categories. And instead of that kind of cumbersome flow that we had before, we've now, and let me minimize this so it's a little bigger. So we've now got a flow that shows us how people flow through all the category pages as one home page, product page. So you can see that there's a good mix of people coming in on category pages. Some leave immediately, some go onto a product page. There's a lot of people that come in on the home page and then go to category pages, so on and so forth. But this gives you a lot more sort of broad view on it. Now, one thing that I noticed when I was doing this is we still got quite a few pages here in other that aren't categorized. And so when I looked at this, I actually saw that we have some preview pages over here. So to show you how quick these will update, if I come back over to my rule, I'm going to add in another condition, and I'm going to say if my page name lowercase contains the phrase preview, then we're going to set it to preview pages. And so we'll see our little preview box that'll come up here and shows us that we've got a few pages that are in there. And so we save it. It does take a minute or two, and sometimes when you refresh it, it may actually give you an error if it's still kind of in the middle of processing things. And so if we get an error, then I'll just jump out and jump back in. But we'll notice that those preview pages are now gone from others. And, well, they're not showing up in their own category yet. So let's refresh one more time.
And maybe if you just scroll down, maybe you just can't see it on the screen there because below the page name, just close that page name.
We might come back to it in a minute too. Okay, there they are.
Oh,
So
there
now,
we go.
so now they're broken out into their own category. And then you can see over here as well that, you know, those will be included there. So entirely retroactive. It is pretty quick. I think the longest I've ever seen it with a data set with billions of rows, it can take 5 minutes or something like that to go back and make some updates.
So much better than waiting for your classifications to update.
Yeah, exactly. Or, you know, you got to check your marketing rules and then go through all those scenarios, and instead you can just go back.
Come back tomorrow and take a look, see if you did.
I hope that you did it right. So we'll also look at another use case that we've got here. So another business question. And I forgot to add an image here, but after a visitor ends their session with our site, what page are they re-engaging with next? So we often look at exits, but I wondered after they're exiting, what pages are they coming back to? Maybe that'll give us some insights about their intentions, their motivations. And so I created another derived field here. And in this case, I used the next or previous function. And so the value is page name. I want to get the next page name on a person scope. I could do it on a session scope if I wanted, but obviously that wouldn't help with the exit page. And then I can choose an index here. If I want the first next page, or the second next page, or the third next page, and you can actually get several of those and then concatenate them together to kind of see those next 2 or 3 pages as one dimension if you wanted to do that. So I get the next page name, and then I'm checking to make sure that it is a session end event. And if it is, then I'll return that next page name that we got with the rule above. If it's not a session end event, then it'll set the value of not an exit. And so if we come over here, and if we look at this freeform table, we'll see that the top value for that next exit page is no value, which means it was an exit, but it means that person hasn't had a return visit. And so seeing that that was almost 70% of the session end events didn't have a return visit, then that made me wonder, what is the return rate for the exit pages that we have? And so I built another freeform table here. And so this time I'm using the page name dimension, and this is our home page. We've got some of our category pages here. And so this first column is the total number of exits from that, or ends from that page. And then this is my no value filter that I drug from over here. And so, for example, on the home page, we had 529 sessions that ended on the home page. 379 of those sessions haven't had a return page now or a return visit now. So the inverse of that is 28% of the exits from the homepage have had a return session. And so I thought that might be insightful for some of our pages to kind of help guide some of those and see, which pages are more engaging for return visits and which aren't. And so again, that's something that value didn't exist. And within, 5 or 10 minutes of being able to create a derived field, then we were able to create that in ways that could bring value to an organization. And so now we'll look at some component settings that allow you to do some similar functions. They're not quite as powerful as derived fields, but derived fields, you're limited to 100 per connection. And connection settings, you can duplicate as many connections or as many components as component settings is what I should have said. You can duplicate components as many times as you want, and then you can manage each of those separately. So there's no limit to the number of components that you can have. So you can do things like force lowercase. Like I mentioned earlier, lower casing does matter on reports. And so if you force lowercase, then all the values will be reported together. If you don't force lowercase, then you'll have different lines just due to casing. Same thing with cleaning white space and special characters. If you've got an extra space, that will cause them to report separately. You can parse, split, and use regex. So we could do this to create our experimentation ID. If that's the first part of the string, and then if the second part is the variant, then we just parse those out into two separate dimensions, and then we've got that. You can also use filtered dimensions. So one that I've created, for example, for a client is a landing page dimension. So if we want to see the flow for just landing pages, then you can look at just which landing pages a customer interacts with, and you don't see any other pages that are between those pages. You can create metrics from dimensions. So for example, if our page name contains the word error, then we can increment an error metric. Or if we didn't think that for whatever reason, our developers forgot to include a search metric on the page, then every time there's a search keyword or every time the page matches a certain page, you can increment your search page. You can deduplicate metrics by person or session with an optional ID, such as order ID or whatever the case might be for that. And then you can count instances or values. So if you want to use the same field for revenue and orders, count the values as revenue and count the instances as order count. You can also set the default attribution and look back periods for the metrics as well. And then those can be overridden at the time of reporting, as they can now currently in Workspace. So any questions about component settings or derived fields? Any comments, any other use cases, Gretchen, that you've used?
No, I mean, it's great to just kind of have that runtime availability and so many stuff.
Yep. One thing I have observed, I've got some case win statements that have maybe 30 or 40 different conditions to them, and those take the longest to populate in reports.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've kind of worked with some stakeholders to explain that because those conditions are so complex that, it's going to take a little while longer to kind of populate.
Yeah, like marketing channels.
And I've got a blog post that I put out there a while ago too on marketing channels, and my colleague Alana and I worked together and kind of came up with some good ways, because at first we tried to create derived fields with marketing channel,
Mm-hmm.
then a different one for detail. But then anytime you update your logic, you've got to update two different sets of derived fields. So instead, we now concatenate the channel and the detail in the same rule, and then just parse those out using the component setting. CK, that's an interesting question. So a derived field can be similar to a calculated metric, but much, much more powerful. One thing that's really cool too is that the metrics that you create with derived fields or with the component settings, you can fully use in flows. You can use them in fallouts. There's some limitations within Adobe Analytics on calculated metrics, and you don't run into those with many things in CJA. You can use them almost everywhere. Because you can combine dimension and text values. In that page categories use case, I only use the page name, but actually with some clients I've used the URL, I've used the page name, I've used a variety of different conditions within the same step of logic. So I think I read on Adobe's site that you can use up to 10 different fields within a single derived field to create the logic. So they can get pretty complex. All right, so let me pull up my notes here on best practices. So we'll look at a couple of best practices that I recommend for component ID consistency and schema path consistency. So every component has a component ID that's used by Workspace and other processes to reference dimensions and metrics. When you set them wisely, analysts can easily switch data views and build projects that'll work with multiple data views, even across multiple connections. However, sometimes the component ID that Adobe sets is not very helpful. For example, here you'll see the page category CID that was originally created as this cryptic ID number, and instead I changed it to page_category. Now, for every data view and every connection that we set up, if we set up a page category as the component ID, then that project that an analyst builds, all they need to do is change that drop down in the corner, and that'll load in other data views, just like it would in Adobe Analytics if the EVAR numbers match and things like that. But if we had left it at this cryptic ID, or when you duplicate dimensions, what it'll do is it adds an _1, or if you duplicate the _1, it adds an _1_1. And I would really, really strongly suggest that you rename those landing page names, something like that can be consistent across data views. Otherwise, your analysts will have a really hard time if they try to use the same project with multiple data views. One thing that's cool here, I've got a link that I've got at the end of this, but you can actually, so in this case, I changed the name of a derived field, but I actually had a use case today for a client that they were collecting something on page, and so the component IDs for the typical attributes are based on the schema path as they come in. And so it might be something like, in fact, here's an example of schema path. And so the schema path name might be web.webpagedetails.name, something like that. And if later you find out that you need to create a derived field because of a mistake that was made in implementation, you can actually update this component ID to match this, and then any projects where page name was previously used will now be updated with the new derived field that we've been able to get correct information, and none of the users have to change anything on their dashboards. So you don't have to go around and get everybody to update their projects. You can just update it in the back end, and the APIs and the workspace projects all pulled from that component ID. So that's a really cool thing that comes in handy quite a bit. So another best practice is regarding schema path. And so here we've just got a couple of simple data values that we're pulling in. So you notice that we've got a web data set and an app data set. They're two different data sets. Our top two lines there both have home page, and the home screen. But notice that the schema paths don't match exactly. The last part does, but the previous parts don't. Same thing for revenue. We've got a commerce revenue total, price total, and an app price total. What'll happen within CJA is, since those schema paths don't match exactly, is if you pull those data sets in, it's actually going to pull in two name details, two name fields, one for web, one for app, and two revenue fields, one for web, one for app. So instead, if you set those consistently, then it'll combine your home page and your home screen into one name field and your revenue into a single name field. And if you need to, you can always break those out using the dataset ID or device type, something like that. So, you're not stuck. But if you set it like this, then you're going to have two completely different data sets that'll never automatically combine together.
I do want to go back up to the component ID because that is so, again, like such a big thing, and I feel like it's kind of hidden. Would you mind sharing your screen again and showing like that over in CJA, like where people would look for that? Because this is just so helpful. Like you said, being able to change your data view or like your report suite, that's data view's equivalent to kind of report suite from Adobe Analytics, and not have to pull over all your dimensions because they have a different component ID is so good.
Yeah, it's huge. So let's say, for example, that we select, I think this is one of the test ones that I've done. So we've got this partner brand here. Yeah, and I think one thing that makes it almost like you miss it is because if you look at component ID, it's not a box like you can change here, but if you hover above it, then this magic pencil appears that you don't even realize is there unless you hover above it. But, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. So we've now got, let me just search by partner brand. So we've now got, I'll show them on here. Let me hide a couple of things so we've got a partner variable product name brand _1 and variable product name brand. And so if we change this one and we use it for another purpose, because this originally, I think if I'm not mistaken, came from product name. And what I did was I basically just parsed it so that if it had, whatever one of these 10 brand names in it, then it would assign it to a brand, something like that. But if we use it for another purpose that's not necessarily related to the brand of the product, but we forget to rename that, Workspace is still going to be pulling this, and the API is still going to pull it by this product name brand _1. But instead, if we come over here and change this to, let's say, product name, maybe it's product name category. And so we come over here and change this to product name category, and we set that in other data views, then that same thing will be referenced in every case.
Because it is kind of like you said, it's kind of hidden because it's almost like that old video game Zelda. Like you had to know like where to push on something to get.
Yeah. And then the category, the process to swap this out too is kind of cool. So, let's say for example, if you are using this, then basically all you have to do is take the component ID of the component that is in place, and then you have to change this to something else first. And CJA won't let you set the same component ID, so you have to save it with the archive first, and then you can come here to this other one, and then you can change it to the one that you had. And now that you've made that change, the next time any project opens, it's going to have swapped in this new component, and nobody needs to do anything. And so everything will automatically feed with that.
Yes, I know I have a lot of _1 component names because I didn't know I could change it.
Yeah, and it's because I that's one of those things that I think we kind of learned the hard way because we didn't realize how important it was, and then after you kind of learn that, and then you're like, it'd be hard to clean because once a component's out there in use, then you can't change the component name, because if you change the component name, then it breaks the reports where that component's currently in use. And so that's one that, definitely as soon as I set it up, I try to always remember to, to change that component. Any other questions on best practices before we look at a couple pitfalls here? All right, so kind of in the home stretch here, the first thing that are common pitfalls is that data types are vital. So in Adobe Analytics, data types don't really matter much. But in CJA, if you try to send in data and the data type doesn't match what you've defined in your schema, then the data won't be ingested. And so that can be problematic because in some cases, Adobe Analytics has actually been accepting maybe a string and a integer in the same field. For example, SKU. Maybe some departments use SKU as a number, some departments use SKU as a string. But in CJ, if they're not set consistently, then you're going to have problems. Just as a side note, I would recommend that even if your SKU is a number, I would set it as a string because you're not going to do math with your SKU. You're not going to average your SKUs. And so I would definitely use that as a string. But within CJA, there's no way to cast to a different data type. For example, I had one stakeholder who wanted to get an average index value for certain add to cart events. And we were parsing that index value from a string. And even though I could parse the index number out of the string, it was still a string data type. So I'd actually set up a report builder report, which is a lot better in CJA than the old Adobe Analytics one. But I had to set up a report builder report, get it into Excel, and then once it was in Excel, then I could do the math. But because it was a string, I couldn't do the math within CJA. Another key point to know is that all hits must have a person ID, at least an EC ID. So if you're stitching, that would be your persistent ID, but every hit has to have some person ID in order to be ingested to CJA. And you want to make sure that you don't send any default values like NA or null or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because it'll try to stitch those people together into one single person. And actually CJA, if you get a person ID that has more than, I think it's like 1 million hits in a month or something, it'll stop ingesting data for that person ID. As kind of a way to limit impact of, kind of clearly bogus data. Another thing to be aware of are some differences between CJA and traditional analytics. And so some of these can be obviously pretty important for some organizations depending upon what you use, but CJA doesn't offer hit depth, visit number, customer loyalty, time since visits, etc. And that's because CJA is all based on report time processing. Adobe Analytics relied so much on ingestion processing at the time of ingestion, and it would actually create a visitor profile for every visitor where those metrics were kept, and that doesn't happen within CJA. I know that I think Frederick Warner's written some blog posts on how you can kind of replicate some of that in query service, but with being able to backfill data, and you've got data that might arrive out of order, and so some of that can get pretty nuanced. CJA does allow you to differentiate between first-time sessions and return sessions with a 13-month look-back window. And so that, is kind of the limitation of that. Another thing that's been key for some of our clients is the difference in marketing channel expiration. Within Adobe Analytics, it's a period of inactivity. And so if you've got that set for 30 days of inactivity, if the visitor comes back at least every 30 days, you could have channels that persist for years. In CJA, it's a hard stop. So if you set it to 30 days, anything that didn't happen within 30 days won't be considered as a first touch, last touch, any touch. And so that might be a difference that could be pretty impactful for some clients as well. The enrichment data that's become familiar in analytics may vary depending upon how you ingest the data. And then classification rules. I don't know if any of you guys have classification rule sets that have thousands of rows of regex to classify data sets and things. In CJA, you can use one regex per rule, and that's the limit. And so there's no true one-to-one classification for some of that. And so we've had to get a little creative in how to try to replicate some of those rules. But of course, in reality, a lot of those rules were to accommodate for changing, values. And so, we try to do the best that we can.
I know with that one regex, I was like, ooh, how
Yeah.
much can I like string my regex together? So that was
Exactly.
not fun to do that. Yeah.
Got to be very creative.
Yeah.
And then the last thing that I'll just mention is data views are really easy to copy, which is cool because you can set data views up on the exact same connection. There's no extra charges for data views. I believe you can have 100 per connection. You can set different calendars, different start days of the week, start months of the year. You can change your component settings. You can even, and I find this fascinating, but you can even change your session timeout setting. And so especially if you've got a product that might have longer decision times, you could have one data view with a 30-minute session timeout, another with a 1 week, and another 30-day session timeout. And each of those will give you the same data, but looking at it from a 30-minute session or a 7-day session or a 30-day session. The caveat right now is as soon as you copy a data view, it's completely independent from all other data views. And so anything that you might need to change in one data view, you would need to change in all three, and that can get pretty complicated and hard to do. I understand that Adobe is working on that, and from what I understand, that's on the roadmap for the hopefully near future, but that's currently not possible. And so, that's kind of a big caveat there, as far as creating extra data views. So I've got some additional resources, some links that I can drop in, and we'll send out the deck. But curious what questions people have and what other use cases people have worked with in CJA.
Yeah, we'll get the deck posted on our Gnome Central website. So it won't come out in an email, but it'll be there on the website for anyone to get to. So.
It's just the same link. So it's the link if you go to where you came to join the session, that's what we'll have right.
Yeah.
That's awesome, Josh. I think you hit on a lot of the really great things that can be done with CJA, like the differentiators.
Yeah, there's just so many things, and I think I'm kind of a nerd because I love like when the new release notes come out and you see what's coming, and like they just released product analytics today. I don't know if I have it in the sandbox.
I looked. We don't have it in.
You don't have
I don't
it
think it's. Well, we didn't have it, so maybe it's not. It's rolling out. It might not be GA for everybody, but because I saw that today too, and I'm like, oh, cool. But no.
Not yet. Yeah, I do have it on at least one of my clients. I saw it, and it'll allow you to understand, which projects are used, which components are used, how many people are using them, and I think that'll be a real game changer on, being able to show some of the value and things like that. So.
Oh, I'll miss downloading the logs so much, though.
Yeah. At least the logs in CJ are better than Adobe Analytics, right?
That is true. That is absolutely true.
In the chat, and people will upload this recording later tonight, so it should be available. Coming again tomorrow morning. So.
Oh, and actually, I'll drop this link in the chat right now. This is Eric Matisoff, if you're familiar with him from Adobe, the Analytics Evangelist, I believe is his title. So this is a LinkedIn learning course that he's got on LinkedIn. And if you haven't done it before, you can get, I think, a 30-day free trial, something like that. But this course actually gives you CJA Sandbox as well. So you can access the sandbox, get in and play around with it. So if you haven't worked in CJA yet, and you want to see what it's like, then you can get in and learn on this LinkedIn Learning, and that link will take you directly to Eric's page.
That hands-on always is so beneficial when you're walking through like a tutorial. Yeah. Oh, Josh, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm with everybody. This is definitely one of the things that taught me great tips, and definitely have to have you back. This has
Yeah.
been wonderful.
Thank
Yeah.
you
And
for
yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'm on Measure Slack a lot too, or the Community Experience League. I'm a community advisor there, so I love to answer questions. And if anybody comes up with any questions, feel free to drop them in there as well.
So, yeah, thanks for getting our 2025 series off to a great start. So,
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I
bar
appreciate
is
it.
high now, guys. So we'll have to.
Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.